Welcome back. Singapore is rolling out training and help for more to know how intellectual property or IP can protect and grow their business. Similar issues were discussed at a global forum called IP Week. And to tell us more, we have Daren Tang from the Geneva-based World Intellectual Property Organization, otherwise known as WIPO. He is the first Singaporean to head a UN agency. Welcome.
Thank you, Dawn. Yeah.
Mr. Tang, you would imagine that it's common sense. If you want to encourage people to innovate, you have to protect whatever that they do innovate and then develop.
Absolutely.
And yet, according to you and your organization, you found that's not the case.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's a perception problem that IP has. That is a technical subject matter best left to the experts. But what we're trying to do at WIPO is to transform the view of IP. And we think that it's actually a very powerful catalyst for jobs, for investments, for business growth, and for economic and social development. Studies show consistently that companies that make use of IP and incorporate it into part of their business strategy earn more revenue than those that don't, more revenue per employee. And yet many SMEs still don't understand how to use IP. And so that's part of our mission now at WIPO. We are broadening the view of IP. We are looking at how it can be useful and part of a journey for companies rather than just something that is a legal right. And part of the work that we're doing, and we're doing here in Singapore, right, is to bring that message here. So I was very happy to sign an MOU with the Singapore Manufacturing Federation 2 weeks ago to help members of SMF to use IP as part of business strategy. And yesterday, right, I announced at the IP Week conference that Dawn mentioned that we're going to help work with the IP Office of Singapore to mentor Singapore companies in using IP as part of their business strategy. So we hope that companies understand that IP can be their shield and their sword, the shield to protect the new innovations and brands and designs that they may have, but also a sword to go out to the world and compete effectively.
So IP protection is so essential. It should be part of the DNA of any company, anybody who is a creator or an innovator. Mr. Tang, you are in charge of an international body that looks at these patent filings globally. Yeah. This is something that we do here in Singapore as well. But how do we stand up in terms of the number of filings and tell us, you know, in a quantifiable way, why it matters? Yeah.
Well, you know, like any small country, Singapore's total number of filings, right, will not stand up or will not look good compared to big countries like China or US or Japan or Korea. So in terms of the international patent filings before the World Intellectual Property Organization, Singapore is ranked number 18, but in the top 20, which is good, but we are not, in terms of numbers, right, comparable to some of these other countries. China, for example, right, files close to 70,000 patents before WIPO every year. Singapore files almost 1,600, slightly above 1,600. But when you look at things from a per capita basis, Singapore is doing pretty well. Singapore is ranked number 6 in the world on a per capita basis, ahead of US and Germany and China. So I think when we look at small countries, right, it's not useful to just look at absolute numbers. You have to look at other metrics. And I think the quality of the patents is important. The question we have always in WIPO is, are the patents creating impact? Are they helping to change people's lives for the better? And it's very share of you that WIPO launched its first IP Global Awards to encourage and to reward SMEs around the world that use IP and use IP for global impact. And one of the 5 winners of the first ever WIPO Global Awards is a Singapore company called Lucence that does, that's in medtech and diagnostics. So I think the key is, can a small country like Singapore punch above its weight in terms of creating technology that creates an impact in the world?
All right, I'm interested in what you mentioned earlier, this sword and shield aspect of IP protection. It's not, we imagine, it's just register and then commercialize this asset. But in fact, it, as a process in itself, maybe learning to value what we develop and learning how to protect that in itself becomes a process that maybe moves a company forward and larger still move a country forward, which very abstractly in our uncertain time right now might be, I don't know, something that is solid and concrete and structured.
I think what IP does is that it's not just a way of protecting your ideas, but it's a way of starting conversations with other companies. Let's take the smartphones, for example. There are literally tens of thousands of patents and IP in there. The brands, so it's not just the patents, but it's the brands, the trademarks, and the designs. And in a lot of the journey, right, of an idea to the market, you need to collaborate with other companies to bring that. So IP allows you to start those conversations. And what's interesting now is that IP is increasingly seen as an asset in itself to secure financing. So when startups go to investors and say, hey, I need to grow my business, investors and VCs will ask, can we have a look at your IP? You know, what are you doing and how are you growing your business and how are you protecting that? And one of the things that WIPO is looking at, and we'll start a global conversation on this, is how do we help companies use their IP assets to unlock financing? Can they go to the bank and collateralize this assets and tell the bank, you know, can you lend me some money and secure some financing, right? And by pledging these IP. And I think that's something that I think it's really exciting. If you look at what's happening in the world right now, as we innovate, as we create, right, value creation shifts from tangible assets to intangible assets, data, IP, know-how. And by some estimates, right, global value of intangible assets has reached $40 to $60 trillion, which is more than the US and Chinese economies combined. And it makes no surprise that big companies around us are all intangible asset-based companies. So how can we help them to use all these assets, right, in different ways so that they can grow their business and bring value to the world?
Mr. Tang, with businesses, small businesses and medium-sized businesses forming so much of a country's GDP, it becomes so important, you know, to see that there are very real ramifications. If you underreport your intangible assets, you don't actually, and for an economy as well, you're doing a lot of other work as well to bring IP beyond the issue of IP for IP professionals. Can you tell us something about that?
I think what we are trying to do, right, is to build a more inclusive IP ecosystem. Historically, the IP ecosystem has served big companies in certain economies well, but it's not served women, youth, and SMEs well. So the priorities for WIPO in the next few years is to reach out to women and youth and SMEs and to bring IP to the grassroots level. We're even working with communities, indigenous communities who've traditionally felt that IP was not their friend, because IP was a way for people to come in and appropriate their traditional heritage and take it to the world. See? So what we're doing is that we're trying to make sure that we help these communities to understand IP, make it their ally, register the IP they need to register. It may not be patents, but it will be things like geographical indications or trademarks, so on, and then help them to take that to the world. So that's a project we're doing in Mexico with a very, very dynamic group of indigenous communities in Oaxaca that have been weaving silk for several hundred years. So we're helping them to register that as an IP, but more than that, right, to use IP to market and brand and package their heritage and take it to the world on their own terms. So we're trying to really build a much more inclusive IP ecosystem.
Yeah, and to show how it can be such a game changer.
Exactly, for everyone and not just for big companies.
And we could continue talking about this topic all evening, Mr. Tang. It's so interesting. We didn't even get onto the topic of how it can help climate change, poverty, and so on. Thank you so much for coming into the studios.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Daren Tang there, Director General of WIPO.